So, welcome back again to the second part of Come and See Inspirations. My name is John Keeley, still joined by Shane Ambrose. And it's a wonderful occasion for us to welcome back and to Come and See Inspirations podcast today. Someone who's been on it for a lot. It's someone that we were delighted that she could accept the invitation to come on and join us today because she's full of inspiration for us every time she comes on. What an introduction. Noreen Lynch, how are you?
I'm grand, but I won't be well after that introduction. I have to live up to that.
Well done. Thanks a lot indeed.
Lovely to be here.
And Shane, of course, great to have you back again, Shane. So we're going to chat about Easter and Easter Sunday and all things Easter. Noreen, what sort of stuff came into your mind when I asked you about Easter and
oh my Lord,
it's been people?
It's been an interesting year for me because I've been, as I think a lot of people know, I've been off work for most of the year, dealing with breast cancer and some treatments, and I'm back and in total good health. Everything's great.
Praise the Lord.
And yet, when you come into the journey of Holy Week, but particularly the Triduum, you're really aware of having gone down into the tomb and come back out the other side. And I don't mean that as in death, but in that sense of having faced yourself and your life. I think as we get older, when we're younger, I think our language of Easter, like mine anyway, would have been a very, the joy of everything was great and it was all sorted and it was real positive. And when I talked a language of suffering or pain, I was talking from a place of, I presume that's what it's like and it must be terrible, but I'm grand. Yeah. And yet, as we live and we go through, and I don't just mean physical trials, but, we go through relationship difficulties, we go through loneliness, we go through the different stuff of life that comes at us. I think we begin to realize that, that the world that we live in can speak a language of despair or a language of hope, and that there's almost a time to choose and to say, I choose to stand for hope, or I choose to say there's no point trying. What struck me when I was thinking about this Easter was how much we need the language of Easter now, because we have a lot of our language has been that language of despair and there's no point trying and it's all gone to pot and the world is terrible. And that language that pulls us down and says, really, even God couldn't fix this. And yet, I think I probably said this last year, actually, because I know I said it when I was in Glenstall. I used to have a poster on my wall, and it's when I was in my 20s, and I said, Easter is a protest against despair. And I used to think of, we're fighting the system. But I begin to think as I age that the protest is against the despair part of myself that might lie down and say, sure, why would I try and what's the point? Because so often in as I say, the culture in the world, we begin to say it's too hard and everything's gone wrong in this generation and all that. And yet, they say the only sin against the spirit really is a sin of despair, is a sin of saying even God couldn't save this. So Easter has become for me very much a time of recognizing my own journey, and not trying to kind of smile it away and say it's all grand and I'm fine, but really saying, God, I understand what it was like for Jesus to be abandoned or to be lonely. I get that sense of what it was like to be misjudged, not just from this past year, but in life, but also really to say, and I choose very consciously that I just don't want to say, yes, Jesus rose from the dead. I want to say, we live in a post-resurrection world. We live in a world where we know that God breaks through. We live in a world where no generation is lost. We live in a world where there is always hope, not because things are easy, but because we have seen the greater thing on the other side. And we can reach and trust that. We can trust that God has this in hand, not because we know, we don't have the facts. The facts don't necessarily agree with that, but yet there's that sense. I think that's probably the language that's going on for me. There's John, yourself, I talk my way into thinking, so sometimes I wander a bit as I'm getting where I'm going. But
no. I love the way you introduce that word hope, because as you were speaking there, of course, this is the year of hope.
Yes.
And very much linked, isn't it? Easter and hope and the year of hope and your own story and so on and so forth. It's all linked together with hope.
Yeah, and hope is not a kind of an aspirational thing. Like hope is a sense that God has promised to heal the world and asked us to cooperate in that. So I live and work from the conscious knowledge that I do what I can do and God will do the rest. That's what I'm coming out of. That's my understanding of life. I think it's Rebecca Salmon that says that hope isn't a lottery ticket that you sit on a couch and gaze lovingly at. It's an axe you use to break down a door. But she said hope is this active thing of saying, I'm stepping into this way of understanding the world. I think Vic Havel, but one of the great activists of Eastern Europe talked about that hope was a way of living your life, not just an aspiration. That if you didn't have a sense when you get up in the morning that, yes, we're going to create this better world, that why would you start your day? And he says, I really pity people who don't have that sense.
Yeah.
So it's, I suppose, in a world where sometimes we can get caught into the negativity, it's a really good invitation, Easter, to just stop and say, actually, am I living as somebody who believes the resurrection has happened and that I am part of this new world? Or am I living as someone who's saying, I hope God catches up with us soon and gets on with the resurrection because it's looking terrible bad.
Yeah. And the other thought that comes to my mind, it's just the thing that you're doing now at the moment. It's the thing that I'm a big fan of, and that's sharing. Because if we don't share each other's hope and share each other's stories, then the other guy is going to miss out and probably needs to hear.
Lovely. That's so true. Yeah.
Shane, what about yourself? Any other thoughts come round hope, Easter?
Well, I just as Noreen was talking, I was trying to remember. I was trying to remember a quote a couple of years ago when he was the Pope. Benedict the 16th wrote an encyclical, and it was called Spe Salvi, which is blah blah blah. I'm trying to remember what it translates as, but it's saved in hope. And there was a lot in it. It was one of those letters which wasn't actually that heavy. You could actually anyone could pick it up, which was a surprise for Joseph Ratzinger because of course he was the German theologian. But it was a lovely letter to hope. And he said, Christians, they don't know the details of what awaits them, but we know in general terms that our lives will not end in emptiness.
Lovely.
And it was such a simple way of putting it, and it's for me as well. It's definitely one of the things I'd agree with Noreen. As you get older, I suppose your understanding and your take on it does change a little bit. Because I know myself, I love the Easter liturgies, and it comes from my experience with Winthress, and Easter was a big thing for Winthress at one particular time when we could do it together, and there was a lot of action and there was a lot of enthusiasm about you're celebrating your liturgies, your Seder meal, your 3:00 ceremonies, your way of the cross, and then your vigil on Holy Saturday night, which could go on for 4 hours easily. But as I've gotten older, I think I realized of the importance of Holy Saturday. We're Irish people, we tend to be Good Friday or Easter Sunday. And sometimes I recognize that we need to sit in the middle with Holy Saturday because we have to go through it to come out the other side. You have to recognize the silence of the journey. And anyone that's done Camino knows that, or anyone that's walked any of the pilgrim ways, or if you've done Croagh Patrick and you're climbing up that steep bit on the cone and you're stuck, you kind of can't go up and you can't go down, you have to keep going. Or if you're doing St. Patrick's Purgatory, it's like, well, you're on the island, you might as well keep going now, you can't get off it and you can't get to bed. And it's that sense of journeying through, not 100% sure exactly where you're going to go, Noreen, as you said. It's not a scientific thing, but knowing there is something to journey towards. And spring is so important in that regard, because for me, for whatever reason, the term that has been coming into my mind again and again over the last 2 weeks is chrysalis. A butterfly or a moth, the caterpillar forms chrysalis, and then when they've gone through their transformation, they come out of the chrysalis. And for me, it's such a metaphor for resurrection that people could probably link into a little bit easier. But it's that whole idea, I suppose, of as you said, Noreen, Easter is a protest against despair. But protest is a word where you push back against it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a violent thing. We're not giving anyone the permission to do anything to us. It's peaceful protest, following the example of Martin Luther King, for example. But it's that language of transformation, but coming from our own experiences. And for many people, I suppose, as you said, Noreen, the experiences are generally the suffering of illness, getting through a process of illness, or the accompaniment of death. And they're very stark journeys to journey on. But like your story, Noreen, when you're out the other side, it's you're like a snake. You've had to shed that skin, and the person that comes out the other side is a little different.
There's sorry, John.
No, please, yeah.
There's a Kim Rosen poem that I quote most years, but I think it's really interesting to note when you mentioned cocoon and all that, because it's related. And Kim Rosen says, "Do you know how the caterpillar turns? Do you remember what happens inside a cocoon? You liquefy." Because actually, to come off the poem, she says, "You liquefy." Caterpillars don't just grow wings; they actually completely break down inside in the cocoon, and something new is formed. They liquefy. If you opened a cocoon halfway through, you wouldn't see a caterpillar with baby wings. You'd see a new creature being formed. So she says, "You know what happens inside the cocoon? You liquefy. There in the thick black of your self-spun womb, void as the moon before waxing, you melt, as Christ did for 3 days in the tomb." And she says, "Conceiving in impossible darkness, the sheer inevitability of wings." Conceiving in impossible darkness, the sheer inevitability of wings. And I just find that really helpful, the notion that, and I said, if I ever get a tattoo, that'll be what I'll get on my arm. But I won't. But that idea of in the impossible darkness, where everything falls apart, and you say, how do we make sense of this? Should I be more cynical? Would that be a way to cope with the world? Should I be harder? Should I train my children to be bitter and nervous of people? And you say, no, there's something else. And that going down into that dark place, whatever it is for you, whether it's relationship, whether it's an experience with work, whether it's illness, whether it's the loss of somebody you love, in that dark place, you don't just come out a little bit different. You're transformed, which means you can't go back to who you were. And I think Christ in the tomb was transformed. We talk about transfigured, all those words, but that changed. You can't go back to who you were, because now you know more and you've experienced more and you're different. And there's a bit of loss that comes with that. I'm sure there's many a butterfly would quite happily sit munching leaves all day if they could and say, I don't really want to be flying around the place. But yet, the transformation means something new is born. And a really interesting thing with a cocoon, as I'm sure you know, is that if the new butterfly coming out pinches a tiny hole and squeezes out through that hole. And the story is often told of the man who went and thought he was helpful by tearing that hole wider. Mm-hmm. But the truth is that as the butterfly squeezes out through that difficult space, like a child being born, the blood is forced into its dead wings. And in that squeezing, the blood moves through its wings, and so it can fly. But if you help it too much and it doesn't come through this painful time, the butterfly can't fly and doesn't survive. And in some way, that conceiving in impossible darkness, that times when we feel, how could we possibly survive? We can, I think, at Easter remind ourselves of Christ and say, it's not just that we're remembering Christ and didn't he have a terrible heart, but rather we can walk with Christ and say, there is no darkness, however impossible, that he didn't go down to, and I can walk with him because he walks with me every day. And so we walk together in the impossible darkness, knowing, not considering or whatever, but knowing that there are wings in this. And I don't just mean angel wings, but knowing that the transformation is happening, that the transformation isn't just of avoiding the pain, it's of coming out a new person in a different space. I was reading some lovely stuff during all of this. I had a lovely book by Brian Grogan, which was on the spirituality of aging. I was reading it with my dad. And he talked about how when we think of ourselves as babies and we say, did God love us as a baby when we could do nothing? And we were useless to anybody. And he didn't put it quite that badly. But, you know, when we had no abilities and couldn't take care of ourselves, and we have no doubt that we were loved as babies. And as we get older and we begin to lose some of our abilities and we're transformed by our body's abilities, or we're transformed by losses or regrets, we think, how could someone love me? And Brian writes, sure, aren't we the very same lovable baby with 50 or 60 or 80 years of wisdom on top of it? Why wouldn't God love that? Could we trust God to love us? And so some of the Easter, I always feel some of the Easter Paschal mystery is we acknowledge the suffering, but if we don't acknowledge that in journeying together, we come out the other side and are loved, then all we're doing is wallowing in the despair. But if we can say, Jesus and I are going to walk the road this week, and now we've come out the other side. And because Christ has come out the other side transformed, I can come out the other side transformed. Yeah. In impossible darkness, the sheer inevitability of wings.
And, you know, there's no formula, is there? You know, there's no formula to state, you know, whatever the case might be, that we're going to come out okay. It's just, for want of a better word, going with the flow. Just, is that right?
And what is okay? You know,
yes.
In a world that tells us we should be perfect in every way, all our relationships should work, all our health should be good, we should have 3 new knees and 4 new hips and climb Everest in our 80s. You know, what's okay? You know, being content, being able to smile at the people who mind us, being able to be grateful. These things are part of Easter, aren't they? These are the wings that will carry us.
And seeing the children, you know, seeing the children around us and the young people around us, and those who are not so young either, enjoying life, even though they don't have the things that the world tells us are important. They have the simple little things. I mean, we can think back to our parents' time and so on and so forth. They didn't have half the stuff that we have. You know, we have all these gadgets and so on and so forth. And we can say, well, yeah, we're going to go on this holiday and that holiday. But they didn't have any of that, but they were happy out. And so it's simple. Maybe it's just allowing. Is it allowing God to be God? I mean, it's a bit like nature. You know, we set the seed and then something happens and it grows and it produces fruit and so on and so forth. The same as ourselves, as you just said. We go through that time of the Good Fridays, and we all have them in one form or another, some harder than others. But there's a lesson in all of it, I assume, and I assume that's part of the plan. That if I was to have, just like you said about the butterfly, I'd often heard that story myself about the caterpillar trying to come out. You know, there was a fellow thinking he was helping the person, but he wasn't helping the person. He wasn't helping that poor little butterfly. Would never be able to fly now because he prevented what nature had in plan. And maybe that's what happens with us sometimes. Is that right?
I think right or wrong but it's more like that I suppose in the going through, I probably a really interesting conversation is how we view death in the world now and how much we avoid death and how afraid we are of death and suffering. And yet there's part of our life journey has to be that our body breaks down. And it's not simply that we should survive and go through pain, but rather that part of learning that we're beloved is realizing that when we can't do anything, we're still loved, and that we're part of a family who mind us not because we make money, or mind us not because we cook for every time the family gathers, or we'll mind all the grandchildren. We are loved regardless. So our language around death and all those things and suffering can be, let's avoid them. And the invitation, I think sometimes Catholicism got mixed up and we talked a bit about as if suffering was a virtue, and it's not. But when we have pain and when we have difficult times, to be able to know that we are loved and to be able to journey and recognize God with us.
Yeah.
The gift, rather than suffering for the sake of it, but rather that thing of saying we recognize Christ who's with us. And so that preparing for different phases of life, that managing, all that's happening. I just think at different stages of our life, we can step into Holy Thursday, Good Friday, the Easter Vigil, the Holy Saturday. I think Shane is dead right, is that space of not knowing. And again, that's completely countercultural, because the culture says you should have a plan.
Yep.
You should be going every day. You should be going. Now, and so when we find ourselves in times when we're not sure what's going on, we think, oh, I must be wrong. I should have an answer. And yet here is this thing of, just wait. There's something else. You don't have the answer. Just journey with me. Keep walking with me.
Well done, Noreen.
Shane? Yeah, it's an interesting one there. It's just that whole idea of, as you said, Noreen, being able to sometimes have the patience of illness and the learning that comes from it. And I think it's not out of the way to say that sometimes women are better at it than men, because I don't think it's unfair to say that. It's not a gross generalization, but there's an element of truth to it as well. But there's a sense, I suppose, something that struck me, I think it was last year when we were talking about Easter and we were talking about resurrection. And the line that comes in is Jesus' own glorified body is the term that's used. And we don't know what that necessarily means. We know the disciples saw him. But the thing that struck me about it was he still had the marks of the crucifixion.
Yeah.
And I don't know, is there a song that's there at the moment that basically the only things in heaven that are man-made are the wounds on Christ's risen body, But the way I was looking at that was slightly different. I was kind of looking at it from the point of view, Jesus, if he'd wanted to, could have gotten rid of those marks.
Yeah.
But he kept them. And there's a message in there for us that despite all our perceived imperfections that the world tells us that we have, whatever those are, physical or otherwise, that in that weakness, Jesus is there with us as well. And that whole idea as well, then, as you said, Noreen, of being able to let go, and particularly as we get older, it's such countercultural to the idea of control and independence. Yeah. That we're kind of put there as models for us, that we kind of forget that that great that song and the poem that goes with it, it's on the tip of my tongue. No man is an island. And each of us is part of what it is to be human. It's to be human is to be in communion with each other, to be in connection with each other. You can't be. We've said it. I don't know. It's people will be sick of me saying it on the program, on the podcast. It's kind of, to be Christian is to be in communion, in community. Is to be in community. You can't be a Christian on your own. You're part of a greater whole, and there's that sense of recognizing that as well. And it's interesting because I recently came across art from a guy in Cork. He's called Caleb Butterley, and he had paintings at a show in the RDS before November, and they'd be a little different. They wouldn't be to everybody's taste, But what struck me about his artwork, they were human. They were life drawings. So but what struck me about his paintings was the models that he had used were everyday men and women. And particularly for the men, they were older guys, stocky and heavy and going a bit bald. And, the absolute opposite of your six-pack Michelangelo's David in Florence kind of an image, And it just the paintings to me they were done, and they were done in this color scheme of grey and rust,
Yes.
because Caleb worked in metalwork, and it was just to me it was just the color scheme in its own was just kind of the drabness of how we sometimes see ourselves, with the rust as the faults in the metal, but at the same time the painting was showing, the beauty of the human form and the musculature, for the guys that were modeling. And it was very profound, because for me it's it's a painting. There are paintings. There's a series of paintings that I will come back to, but to me it was very kind of in tune with that whole sense of resurrection, that idea of change, that idea of, but recognizing that the change happens in the ordinary, that it's not necessarily something. We're not going to have moments of Tabor. You're not going to have the visions and the locutions. That our resurrection moments take part and are part and parcel of our daily journeys, right up to the end and even beyond.
Shane, thanks a lot indeed for that. Now, I think maybe we can speak more about resurrection and so on and so forth, maybe in gospel section, in the next section. But now maybe it's an appropriate time to take a bit of music. Noreen, what bit of music did you...
Yeah, well, I picked something a little bit different. I hope that's okay.
That's great.
We had a beautiful concert last week. It was in Dublin, the RDS. It was a Sufi woman, and she does a lot of interfaith and chants and music across all the different faiths. And often what she does is she just uses all the different names for the divine. She talks about God, Jehovah, Allah, Buddha, and not Buddha, sorry, but she talks about all. She takes Buddha's chants, but takes all the different types. So she's a lovely chant that she's very well known for. Her name is Snatnam Kaur, and the chant is it's just 2 lines. I'll tell you the 2 lines so you can listen to it. May the long time sun shine on you, and all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way home, guide your way on. And so I suppose the invitation, I often think of the sun is a fantastic image for God, because it absolutely just consistently pours itself out, absolutely asking for nothing in return, just pours life out. And so in some way, that as we just listen and notice the sun this morning, the newly risen sun in all its symbolism, that we just, may the long time sun shine on you, and may all love surround you. So that would be my wish for everyone this Easter morning.
Let's hear this before we come back again after the break to read the gospel.
May the long time sun shine upon you. Oh, love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on. Guide